RealAg Live. And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. I'm your host today, Shaun, Haney. Hope you're having yourself a great Monday, and you had yourself a great weekend as well. Hey, today we're going to have a great discussion about silage corn. Really looking forward to it. Kind of takes me back to a bit of my roots for sure. Really looking forward to today's show. If you have any feedback or questions today for our guest, all you have to do is enter them in the box, whether you're watching on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. This is a live broadcast, so you get to ask your questions. This isn't some sort of recorded seminar that we're sort of playing for you and pretending that we're live. We are live. Who knows what's going to happen. Let's bring in our guest. It is Alana Serhan. She is an agronomist with Pride Seeds. Hey, Alana, how are you?
Doing good. Wavering some snow here. I had to shovel my driveway this morning, but we're happy to get some moisture.
Absolutely. And Alana, where are you? You're based out of Manitoba, right?
Yeah, you betcha. I'm here in Manitoba, southern Manitoba, you bet.
Okay, how long have you been an agronomist with Pride?
Yeah, so I've been an agronomist with Pride, I guess 5 going on 6 years now. I was kind of there with a stint as a student and then came on full-time just over 3 years ago. So
good.
It's been a great ride so far.
Good. Well, hey, the cows got to eat, so we got to produce some silage. Now, there's a lot of people that are growing corn in the U.S. and in Canada, producing it for grain corn. But there is a proportion of those acres that are being grown specifically for silage. Now, some of the practices are the same, and some are somewhat different. So we're going to run through some of the things that you need to do to make sure you're maximizing that corn silage yield. We want to produce as much tons as we possibly can in a nice little package. So one of the practices or one of the things on the list that you probably should have done a long time ago, and if you haven't done it, I feel a little bit bad for you. You're not exactly setting yourself up for success here, is hybrid selection. So when we're selecting a corn hybrid for silage versus grain, what are some of the things we need to be thinking about from a silage perspective?
Great question. Something a lot of growers who are transitioning from maybe more of a barley or an alfalfa forages, when they're coming over to that corn silage market, a lot of those beginner questions can pop up. Some of the biggest things that we need to consider is obviously what that operation's needs are as far as quality versus quantity. We need to make sure that we're selecting a hybrid based on those specifics. For example, a dairy silage will be likely different than what a feedlot is probably looking for. Dairy is obviously looking for a high energy ration, something that's very digestible. Dairy cows are on a negative energy scale as opposed to beef cows, feedlot cows are on a positive energy scale. So biggest difference really there is quality versus quantity and how that can fit in.
Okay. And what about from a heat unit perspective when I'm selecting that hybrid? Is anything change up in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're thinking about, folks who are growing a number of large acres or anything up into that, even beyond 100-acre range, we need to make sure we're spreading out our risk as far as maturity goes, because ultimately a lot of us growers, here in Manitoba, parts of Saskatchewan, even parts of Alberta, we're waiting on a custom chopper. And if we end up having to wait a little bit later on in the season, if we have something that's a really short season product, we're going to lose whole plant moisture, as days go by and that chopper doesn't show up. So I always recommend to growers, whether it be beef or dairy, to, grow 2, maybe even 3 hybrids on farm, staggering them about, 100 to 150 heat units.
Yeah, I know there's this propensity from some growers on the silage side to be like, hey, that was the highest yielded for me last year. I want to grow 1,000 acres of that variety, and it's a bit of a need to sort of work people through it because it can work against you. It seems like the right idea because we do it in spring wheat. A lot of times we do it in canola, but in corn it can really work against us, especially like you said, if that chopper doesn't show up when it's supposed to. we've got a whole bunch of corn at a declining moisture, and we're running out of time.
Absolutely, yeah. And really, when we get into later season, at that point, like I said, we're losing whole plant moisture, which is ultimately just degrading our whole value of the silage, right? The drier we get, the less starch we're going to have, the lower our digestibility is going to be. We have a greater chance of not getting a good pack in the bunk, which is a complete mess altogether. We've seen it in a number of years with early frost, dry conditions. It's something that we need to consider for sure.
Okay, so we got our variety selected. We're going to hit the field. From your perspective, how do you define fit? The soil is fit, because everybody throws that around and be like, oh, you got to wait till the soil's fit, and we got to wait till the
Yeah.
soil's fit. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, there's a lot of pre-preparation that happens before the planter hits the field, and part of that preparation actually can happen in the fall too. Whether we are spreading manure in the fall, maybe we're putting down anhydrous, whatever that case is. So that all goes into our fit soil preparation. The biggest things though, as we start to see the calendar days go by and guys are looking at the planter in the yard, kind of gung ho and ready to go, we need to be thinking about soil temperature and really just temperature trend. Everyone at this point who's a corn grower is probably very familiar with inhibitional chilling, cold chilling injury, commonly seen it as corkscrewing. Those are direct results of planting into cold soils early, or a result of giving that corn seedling, a really cold first drink of water.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the things this year I think we're going to see specifically in the irrigation belt that I'd be kind of worried about. And I don't know what the right strategy is, right? So, super dry in parts of southern Alberta where there's a lot of corn silage that is grown. And so, do you put the corn seed in the ground and then try to irrigate it up? Or do you irrigate prior to putting the seed in the ground? Because that first water that comes out of that pivot in early May, it is beyond cold. It is brutal. And so you can really cause that corn some damage if you put that wet water on it, won't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that first drink of water needs to be a warm drink of water, no doubt. Over the years, I've seen guys, try a multitude of different things underneath the pivot. Putting the water down early, then going in a few days later after planting, go in after and plant. Sorry, excuse me. And I'm not going to say it's right one way or the other, but just realizing that water coming out of the pivot can actually be detrimental to your crop and not necessarily helping it. We're talking about drought in so many areas, and you think you're just going to be doing that cord seedling, you're going to be giving it the best chance, but really, are you in that case? Anything that's not 8 to 10 degrees Celsius is going to be negatively impacting our crop in those early stages, right? That 8 to 10 is when our germination is going to happen. And if we get a cold drink, and that corn seedling imbibes that water, yeah, that's when we're going to see delayed emergence, corkscrewing,
Yeah.
all of those negative things.
Yeah, corn can be a bit prissy. It's sort of like it's
Great word.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the ideal soil temp?
Yeah, 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, corn is going to germinate around that 10 degrees. As long as, if you got your soil probe down and making sure when we're taking our soil temps that we're going down where our seed is going to be, right? We're not just going that first half inch because that's not where our corn seedling is going to be germinating, right? We're going that, inch and a half, 2 inches where it's going to be sitting, taking that temperature. And maybe your temps, around that 8 degrees and you're still not sure if you could go, but the weekend forecast looks like we're going to be trending into warmth. Then I'm going to say, go ahead, get it in the
Yeah.
ground. We're going to be getting warmer temperatures. Let's take advantage of when you got the time now. And by the time the weekend rolls around, we're going to be sitting pretty.
Shout out to Alan. Hey, Alan, how's it going? Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Everybody else, if anybody has a question, put it in the box. We'd love to get to any of the things that are on your mind in regards to corn silage tonnage and trying to achieve it. Okay, so we got soil. We talked about the temp. What's your thoughts on depth?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things around there. At the end of the day, the reason corn is such a finicky plant is because of its root mass. Because its root mass needs to be so strong, and I mean, you've seen it a lot, Shaun. Like we can get some silage crops under a pivot that can literally be 10, 12 feet tall.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
that root mass to be able to hold up, that pencil plant. So when we're talking about depth, I, as a rule, am always going to recommend 1.5 to 2 inches. If we get too shallow, that's when we're going to see the big issues. We're not going to get, our brace roots aren't going to be able to latch on. Even our mining roots, the roots that are going to be getting our water and our nitrogen, they're not going to be situated down deep enough to take advantage of that fertilizer we banded, right? All of those other things. You'll also hear, some agronomists talk about, planting 1/2 inch into moisture. That's not always a great way to think about it because at times like this spring, for example, there's probably not going to be moisture down there. So we're not going to keep going down and going down and going down to find that moisture. Who knows where we could be. But 1.5 to 2 inches in that range is safe, and that's absolutely where I would recommend.
Yeah, I was putting together some clips for tonight's episode of The Agronomist that you can check out at 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain. You can find it at realagriculture.com/live. Tonight we're talking about getting your corn off to a great start. And one of the things, there's a clip there with Peter Johnson, and he was doing some research in Ontario, and really surprising him how that deeper seeded corn was actually performing better than some of the more shallower corn that was planted, kind of blowing away some of the things that he had sort of long thought. So I'm finding that in numerous crops, we spent a period of time where we were going shallower and shallower and shallower, and now we're sort of getting some research saying, it's okay, you can go deeper.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you have to think about, again, how extensive those corn root systems really are. And if we are planting at that 1.5, 2 inches, we think about, potential water reserves that may be lower, maybe, tapping into some groundwater in some low spots. Corn roots can grow to be 5, 6 feet, tapping into the ground. I've seen some pretty incredible stuff, where there's been water tables and that underneath, and those roots will go down and they'll take advantage of that, right? So definitely to be on the safe side, not shallower. If anything, you want to be just a little bit deeper. It might come up slower, but at least we're going to have a good brace root system.
Absolutely. Okay, Lindsay is watching on Facebook, has a question regarding hybrid selection and number of varieties. So we were talking in terms of, growing 2, maybe 3, even 4 would be okay depending on how many acres you have. We do not have to limit it in terms of how many hybrids you're going to plant. What about in the case of grazing corn? Is that number of varieties and that diversity of lines, is that still as important?
Absolutely. It's even more important, even more so important in our grazing corn. We want to avoid things like acidosis, right? Where if we're getting too short in maturity, that corn can come full circle black layer. And then our cattle are basically ingesting, whole kernel corn, and that's where we can run into some stomach issues. So in grazing, we always want to think about doing, 100 to 150 difference in our grazing blocks. And because as we go through, later in our season, and I mean, God forbid that we'll have an early frost and it'll kill everything. But on a normal year, as we get that maturity and reaching where it needs to be, if we can stagger, when it comes to 65% whole plant moisture, because we're not going to let our cows out into the paddock and they're not going to have full range of the whole gamut. That's just not, making good use of our acreage. So we're going to let them out in acre blocks, right? 3 to 5 acre blocks at a time. So we'll put them in that 60 acre chunk of our first hybrid. We'll block them off, a few acres every 4 to 5 days, and then we'll move them. And as we move them in throughout the winter, we want them to be getting that ideal whole plant moisture or that maturity, whatever happens to be first, before our first killing frost. So 2 to 3 minimum in our grazing corn, absolutely.
Good stuff. Good, very good question. I actually thought you gave a different answer than I thought. That was good. I learned something there. Okay. Now, Alana, a lot of times we talk about rotation. Okay, so having a good rotation, how a good rotation can lead to higher yields. Now, in the case of silage production, we sometimes are growing just as much feed as we actually need. And so we maybe don't have that rotation in the mix. Okay. So we're seeing a lot of corn on corn on corn. Now there may be some barley and some silage wheat mixed in there, maybe a little bit, but I'm just going from kind of, I grew up in Picture Butte, Alberta, where there's a lot of silage corn, and a lot of those fields had corn on them every year. What kind of challenges does that present when you got corn back to back to back?
Yeah, absolutely. We run into a multitude of different things. I mean, first and foremost, we get resistance, whether it be herbicide or disease. We see a lot of things showing up, out east right now with corn rootworm and, the susceptible races, things like that. And unfortunately, that is all going to come west, right? As those, susceptibility and resistance things happen, we will get that. And by growing corn on corn on corn, you're basically, putting yourself at risk for things like, huge infestations of corn borer if you're not growing traded hybrids, right? Corn worm, those populations are just going to compound and compound every year. So that's why, like anything, you wouldn't grow canola back to back to back. So it's no different. You can't be growing corn back to back to back. Now, I understand it's an acreage thing, absolutely. I know a number of folks out in Alberta, they'll do field sharing with guys, right? A lot of the potato growers do it. And we see a little bit of that out here in Manitoba too, because at the end of the day, if your neighbor's operation is a little bit different than yours, maybe you have different needs. So if any way possible, if after 2 years of corn on corn, if we can rotate out into that third year, that's going to be for sure my recommendation. I mean, again, if you're growing canola or if you're growing grain corn, you're not going to be growing every single year after year. So we can't think about silage corn as every different. It still needs to be in that rotation.
Mix in some winter trit. Try some soft wheat for silage. Of course, there's barley. Your tonnage, in the case of a barley crop, your tonnage is going to be lower, but long term, you're probably really helping yourself out when you get back to the corn crop.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, it's just going to cut down on your operational expenses further down the line, because right now, if we think about, the price of what a straight Roundup Ready hybrid is versus our VT Double Pro versus our what we call smart stacks, as we start to build up our resistance, our price per bag ultimately goes up, right? We need to pay for those traits. And so by, using our crop rotation now, we're actually saving ourselves for later down the line and ultimately helping our bottom line. So.
And you just put something in my head that I didn't have in my notes, but I'm going to address it. The other thing that I've seen over time too is where some silage producers ignore some of the traits because I don't need to worry about all that stuff because I'm growing silage. And boy, I'll tell you what, if you get a bad case of corn borer and everything's moved like hunched over, you'll regret that. But you don't chase the cheapest price. And I know, Alana, you work for a seed company. You're trying to sell seed, but chasing the lowest price per bag and ignoring some of the traits that are out there, you may need some of those traits.
Exactly. It's just like anything. Again, we talk about, blackleg and canola, all those other things, you're not being honest with yourself in your farming operation if you think that you're never going to be susceptible to those things. And like I said, at the end of the day, we can see, even what happened out east and even what happened out west. We have producers that are growing our stuff out on the island in British Columbia, and their rootworm problem is horrible. They can't grow anything else but a smart stacks. And I mean, they're, over there, their acreages are even smaller, right? You have smaller fields. You don't have, 5,000-6,000 acres to grow on your farm. So being mindful of those practices ultimately, 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 years down the road, you're going to be, happy you made those decisions when you did about crop rotation.
Okay. Sarah is watching on YouTube. She has a good question. I think you could ask this question with any crop. How important is even emergence in corn?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we do right from, planting that seed to what we talked about, Shaun, seeding depth, fit soils, everything we're doing is to make sure that we can have even emergence, right? We need all of our corn plants, popping up within 48 hours of each other. Otherwise, we're turning them into weeds, Competition among corn plants, they're not competitive. They are not the athletes that you want in your team because, as you said, Shaun, they're prissy and they don't want to compete. So that even emergence is crucial. Anything that we can do as far as trash management, planting depth, soil temperature, everything we're doing is literally to have even emergence, uniform emergence in a timely manner, right? We don't want that corn sitting in the ground for 2-3 weeks. So everything is really around emergence.
I saw a presentation with Randy Dowdy, former NCGA corn growing champion, and he talks about like you like try to get that emergence down to like 48 hours is kind of the standard practice, but you're taking it to like within a 12-hour period of like he just says like it's just amazing the impact that will have on yield. Something like that's right at the beginning of the growing season. Like you really haven't even talked about nutrients or moisture. Although there's lots of stuff still to happen,
Yeah.
and it's that even emergence that is just so critical.
Yeah. Absolutely. Person
Uh,
thinking about that.
okay. I wanted to ask you about trash management, especially in some of these cases where maybe we have gone corn on corn. Trash management's critical.
Absolutely. I mean, I always tell guys those fancy trash whippers on the back of your planter, like they're not just there to look good, right? We need those things working when there is trash in the way, and we need them, not working when there isn't trash, just lightly tickling the surface, moving debris, corn stover out of the way. If we are in a corn on corn situation, right? Or if we had maybe a really big barley crop the year before, just tickling the surface when we have trash present, and making sure that we're not creating a trench, right, where we can get cold moisture. Again, if we get some cool rains or something will blow across the field, we don't want it sitting right in our furrow, right? So use those trash whippers to our advantage. They're great tools. I recommend every single grower in Western Canada who is growing corn, especially if you're growing corn on corn, trash whippers are an absolute must. And it really comes back to emergence.
Yeah, it's just like your truck. You put all the amenities on your truck to make it look good. You gotta roll out there with all the amenities on your planter too. Don't neglect your planter. Rosemary has a question here. Looking at growing corn for winter grazing, is brown midrib worth the extra value?
Yeah, so BMR corn is something that was actually, introduced to the marketplace a long time ago. I'm a young person, so I can't quite recall on when BMR was brought to the marketplace. So I wouldn't want to say anything that would offend any of our corn growers who've been around for a long time. But BMR is just basically a different kind of a hybrid. Personally, in research that we've done and things that we've conducted, being a silage company, really first and foremost, silage and corn grazing are two of the things that we definitely pride ourselves on here in Western Canada. And we don't currently have a BMR in our early season lineup. So to me, it's not worth the extra money. I think you will get the same, if not better, results out of some of our silage specific hybrids.
What about like hybrids that can be both grain and silage? Like you see that where it's like this is a grain hybrid, this is a silage hybrid, but then there's some, and I know you have some in your own portfolio where it'll do both. Am I giving like is that I'm not getting an A in either category? Am I settling for a B? Like I'm sort of giving up yield for flexibility. Is that true at all or not?
Well, I wouldn't say that you're giving up yield necessarily, right? Because when we talk about using what we would call a dual purpose hybrid for silage or for grazing, we're thinking about growing actually a hybrid that's, probably 200 heat units later than what we would be growing in that area if we were growing grain, right? So that grain hybrid that we grow here in Manitoba, for example, it may be a rockstar grain hybrid, but as we move west into Manitoba or even into parts of Saskatchewan, it's an awesome silage hybrid because we don't take it to maturity, right? We're not taking it to physiological maturity black layer. We are taking it to, half milk line, 65% whole plant moisture is, what we're shooting for. And I think the big consideration in that regard is at the end of the day, our energy is actually coming from our grain, right? That's our starch. That's, a lot of our sugar, things like that. And so we have to think about that grain component of our forage or silage rations as well. So using that dual purpose hybrid that we grow here in southern Manitoba, in parts of western Manitoba, and even in Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta, it has a fit. We just need to think about what our CHU maturity is.
The other maybe difference between growing corn for grain versus silage is fertility. And in the case of the livestock producer, they have they have an endless supply of manure, it seems, and you're always trying to get rid of your manure. And I know I've seen growers that sort of like make the assumption, hey, I spread shit on that land the last 3 years. I'm good. Now, is that the case? Like, do I need to do things like soil testing? Do I need to think about adding some other fertilizer? What do I do there from a fertility standpoint?
I challenge any growers who've never had a soil test done, and just go with that methodology of, I spread manure on there every year, every year, every year. I challenge you to get a baseline of what your field is, and how that progresses year over year, because you're not spreading, I shouldn't say you're not spreading manure every year, because you probably are, because you need to get rid of it. But we have to think about the balance of our nutrients in the soil. Sometimes when we get too much of one and not enough of the other, we can create an imbalance, and then we actually can't uptake it, right? Nitrogen, maybe not so much. Phosphorus, sulfur, things like those, who aren't necessarily mobile in the soil always. You need to latch onto something to actually be able to be uptaken. So just applying manure every single year is definitely not the best practice to optimize, let's call it, optimize our silage yields. We need to get a soil test. We need to have a baseline of, what things are, even all the way down to our zinc and like zinc, potash, even those micros. We need to know what they're doing. And it's not just the one field on your farm. Well, you think all my area is just around the yard. It's got to all be the same. I'm just going to soil test the one field. No, that's not the case, right? Every single field is different, and getting that baseline is crucial. And another thing that I stress to growers, our soils in Western Canada are often cool at planting. We know this. And really, if we think about what that corn seedling needs in the beginning, it's a little bit of starter fertilizer, some warm soils, and a little warm drink of water, and we will be off to the races and going. So starter fertilizer, starter fertilizer, starter fertilizer. And you will see that emergence again. It will be it will become very apparent to you the difference in your corn crop when it got up and going quick, as opposed to sitting in the ground.
The corn crop, well known for responding to management, and a lot of
Yeah,
times we talk about responding to management in a good way, but also
yeah.
it works the other way too. If you have bad management, you're knocking yourself off that optimum yield curve really early in the growing season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and the thing is, if you ever did have the mindset to, do a starter pass and maybe leave 1 or 2 rows from the planter, or maybe you run out one year, right? You don't have enough, whatever you're using, a liquid or whatever it is, and leave that check strip. You will be absolutely amazed by, the difference of starter versus not. And that's something, Pride Seeds, we're actually doing a company-wide, fertility trial. Everyone has to have a fertility trial this year, because growers need to continually be reminded of what does fertilizer do? What is fertility? How can this help you as the grower, your bottom line, right? It's not more seed. It's not us winning. It really is you winning.
Now, of course, there are some livestock acres that are under irrigation, but there also are some silage acres that are not. And the dry conditions are presenting themselves it's a real challenge. If say I'm in Manitoba, I don't have irrigation, but I've got to grow silage corn. Does it change my population? Does it change how does that throw a bit of a nail in the wheel a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, something that is extremely on the forefront this year with, drought looming. I hate to say the word. Everyone probably tuned in, probably was cringing as I was saying it. But
You
ultimately,
already said frost. Now you're saying you're bringing out all the bad words, Alana.
yeah, no, for sure. It's agriculture is a prescriptive based approach. Everything we do is prescriptive as to what we need in our operation, what this field needs, what our animals need. And planting silage corn on a dry year is no different. It's prescriptive based approach. On a dry year, like what we're seemingly going to be going into now, things that we can change are plant population, and even row spacing, as well as, maybe selecting hybrids that have different leaf types. Ultimately, a silage, a silage field that has less corn plants in it is overall going to need less water. So if we think about it as a silage grower, most guys are probably in that, 30 to 32 range. If we can stay comfortable at, at a 30,000 population on a drier year, or at least on some of our acres that we know are really light land, that's going to be ideal, especially in the early going. If we think about, selecting for some hybrids, and again, your hybrid selection has likely already been, done for this year. But if we have the presence of mind to select hybrids that have, what we would call like a pendulum ear type, right? Or leaf, sorry, a pendulum leaf type that would kind of go over and get quicker row closure. We use that a lot when we're talking about weed control, but it's really no difference with moisture, right? You get that morning dew, and with that pendulum leaf, it, covers those rows a lot quicker, and we can keep that moisture down, and it can actually be uptaken, by our plants.
Now, you mentioned weed control, and I'm just thinking back to all these different things. Uh, Early weed control, just because it's silage, doesn't mean you try to just wait as long as possible and catch everything on that, that one pass. That is not what we should be doing here. We need to take control of these weeds early and deal with them because, like you said, corn is not a competitive plant.
No, absolutely. And that goes actually back to what we were talking about as well, manure. What is in our manure? It's from our corrals. It's everything, that was maybe that you were feeding, whether you threw in some screenings and or whatever the case, whatever's in the corral is now going to be out in the field. And if you have any capacity, a pre-burn is always going to be important, especially in short season, short season scenarios. And if you are planting a little bit later into, warmer soils and that corn gets up going quickly, if we have a pre-burn, it's going to have no obstacles, right? So pre-burn and our critical weed-free stage is like V4. I'd rather see you keep it clean till like V6. And critical weed-free period. Anything that pops up in that field during that time is now a threat, right? That corn seedling can sense weeds even before it emerges.
Absolutely.
And
Oh, go ahead.
takes it away.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting there.
No.
So Kara has a question here, and I think it's a good one to finish up on. There's a lot of things we talked about here where it may be a little bit different than you're practicing on your farm. So Kara asked the question watching on Facebook, if you are talking to a grower that is resistant to change, for example, like rotation, variety, could be dealing with those early weeds, could be fertility, whatever, all these different topics we discussed. How are you encouraging this change? What do you suggest, Alana?
At the end of the day, as consumers or growers, often we can be incentivized by being able to either make more money or save money. And by crop rotation, changing a variety, for example, if we're doing crop rotation, if I can switch a guy from, growing corn on corn on corn to maybe like a corn barley or a corn triticale or whatever, if I can prove to him that his tonnage on that first year back after rotation is higher, then that's saving him money. Or if it's a variety selection, how can I quantify that more tons per acre on those acres is going to mean more tonnage in his bunk and ultimately more dollars in his pocket?
I'd also suggest side by sides, like to figure out that ROI. Like try something out. So in the case of dealing with weeds, you know what? Sure, if you're like a one passer where you wait to the very last part of that spray window, do that on some acres, but then also maybe give the two pass system a bit of a try, and maybe try a pre-emerge, try some things out, and see what the difference is. I think if you do some of those kinds of things, you're going to sort of do some of that learning yourself. Well, you don't have to tell anybody that you were doing it maybe incorrectly to start off with, but at least try it out and see what you're doing, and at least then you can figure what the ROI is, right? Because then you can yield it out at the end of the day and contrast and compare.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's some amazing agronomy teams out there and tools that we have access to, even just feed analysis, even tonnage. We have portable weigh scales. A grower wants to do a side-by-side weigh off of tonnage. Well, I don't have a scale in the yard. Give your local Pride Seed rep a call. We'll come out to the field. We'll do a weigh up for you. All of those things that can be done, don't see them as obstacles. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? As industry people, we want you at the end of the day, to have the best, bang for your buck, the most ROI for sure.
The other resource is the Corn School, which you can find at you can find it at cornschool.com, brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF Canada. Big thanks to both of them for their dedication and commitment to education around agronomy. And of course, we've been talking today to Alana Serhan. She is with Pride Seeds, based out of Manitoba. Alana, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the chance to talk corn and the importance of boosting those silage yields.
Absolutely. Cows got to eat, like I said at the beginning. Hey, want to encourage everybody, check out The Agronomist tonight, 6 o'clock Mountain, 8 o'clock Eastern. We're talking about getting your corn off to the right start, a continuation of this discussion, mainly focused on grain corn, but a lot of the practices still apply to silage. If you want to get a little bit more, tune in tonight. Also, RealAg Radio, 4:30 Eastern. On Rural Radio 147 is Agronomic Monday. Actually, Alana's colleague at Pride, Matt Chappell, is one of our guests today on the show. He's talking about soybeans. So lots to check out there. And, of course, you can download the RealAg Radio podcast as well. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.